I stood there stunned, the scent of lemon polish still clinging to my hands as my daughter's words slammed into me like a door. Kyle doesn't want you here anymore. My own child. The baby I once rocked through fevers. The girl I gave up everything for, stood beside a man who never paid a dime to live in my home. And just like that, I was no longer family. I was furniture to be moved. But what they didn't know was this. The deed was in my name. And soon, so was their eviction. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The grocery bags dug into Elaine Porter's fingers as she pushed the front door shut with her hip. The late summer air still clung to her skin, heavy and humid, carrying the faint smell of cut grass from a neighbor's yard. She was tired, but it was the good kind of tired, the sort that came after doing something simple and ordinary. For a moment, she let herself believe this would be just another quiet evening in her home. Then she saw her daughter standing at the end of the hallway. Melissa's posture was stiff, arms crossed as though bracing herself for a storm. Her eyes avoided Elaine's, darting instead toward the closed living room door. The silence in the house was wrong. No TV, no footsteps, no kitchen clatter. Just Melissa waiting. "Mom," Melissa began, her voice tight and clipped. "You need to leave." The grocery bag in Elaine's left hand slipped, apples rolling across the hardwood floor with hollow thuds. For a second, she thought she had misheard. "What did you say?" Melissa's jaw worked nervously, but the words came out firmer the second time. "Kyle doesn't want you here anymore. It's time for you to move out." Elaine's heart punched against her ribs. She stared at her daughter. The same daughter she had once rocked to sleep through ear infections. The same girl who used to crawl into her bed after nightmares. "Melissa," she said slowly, trying to hold her voice steady, "this is my house." The living room door opened with a creak, and Kyle stepped out. His presence filled the space like smoke. He leaned against the door frame with that half-smirk Elaine had grown to despise, as if the conversation was nothing more than a formality. "Not anymore," he said smoothly. "This is ours now." The words hit harder than Melissa's had. Elaine felt her knees weaken, the floor tilting beneath her. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out the ticking clock in the hallway. She studied Kyle's expression, the satisfaction glinting in his eyes, the smug curl of his lip. He wanted this. He had been waiting for this. Melissa shifted, clearly uncomfortable, but she didn't argue. She stood beside her husband like a shadow, small and unsure, letting him take the lead. Elaine's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to tell them both exactly what she thought of their ingratitude, but the words tangled inside her. The scent of the spilled apples mingled with the faint lemon polish from that morning's cleaning, sharp and bitter. It felt like a cruel reminder. This was her home, one she had maintained and cherished for decades. And now her daughter, her only child, was siding with a man who had lived under her roof without paying a single dime. Elaine forced herself upright, shoulders squared. "I paid for this house. Every brick, every beam, every repair. You have no right to tell me to leave." Kyle's smirk widened. "You'll see how much right we have soon enough." The menace in his voice was subtle, but Elaine caught it. It wasn't just about the house, it was about control. He wanted her erased, shut out of the life she had built. Melissa finally looked at her mother, her eyes glassy with guilt. For a fleeting second, Elaine thought she might step forward, might take it all back. Instead, Melissa lowered her gaze, whispering almost apologetically, "It's better this way." Elaine's chest ached, as though someone had pressed a fist hard against her sternum. The betrayal was sharper than any knife. She wanted to remind Melissa of the years she had sacrificed after her husband's death, how she had kept the family afloat, how she had opened this home so Melissa and Kyle could have a roof when their finances collapsed. But the words sat heavy in her chest, unspoken. The sound of footsteps broke the stalemate. Abby appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide, clutching the banister like it might anchor her to sanity. She had heard everything. "Grandma," Abby whispered, her voice barely carrying across the hall. She glanced nervously at her parents before locking eyes with Elaine, her chin trembling but her words steady. "Don't let them do this to you." Her quiet plea sliced through the tension sharper than Kyle's arrogance or Melissa's betrayal. In that moment, Elaine felt the sting of her daughter's disloyalty transform into something else. Resolve. The groceries lay forgotten on the floor. The fight for her home had just begun. Elaine shut her bedroom door with a quiet click, her breath ragged as though she had sprinted up a hill. The laughter of a sitcom drifted faintly from the living room downstairs, Kyle's voice occasionally cutting through. Smug, careless, already talking like he owned the place. Her chest tightened. Every inch of the house seemed to echo with their entitlement, but in this room, she still had control. She crossed to the far corner, her knees protesting as she lowered herself to the floor. Against the wall sat an old cedar chest, its surface scratched from decades of moves and use, the faint scent of wood and mothballs rising the moment her fingers brushed the lid. For years, that chest had been her keeper of everything that mattered. Love letters from her late husband, Abby's kindergarten drawings, financial records, and most importantly, the papers no one else knew she had kept so carefully guarded. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside, the familiar stacks of folders rested, labeled in her tidy handwriting. Bills, insurance, mortgage, and then there it was. A faded manila envelope with Chestnut Drive, written in thick black marker. Elaine slid it out, her heart thudding louder than the cicadas humming outside the window. She spread the papers across her quilted bedspread, the fabric crinkling beneath them. Tax receipts, old bank statements, the final mortgage payoff. And at the very top, the deed, the official document that spelled out in legal ink what Kyle and Melissa pretended wasn't true. Her name? Only hers. No joint ownership, no transfers, no amendments. Her eyes stung, but she refused to let tears fall. Instead, she reached into the nightstand and pulled out a red pen. With a slow, deliberate stroke, she circled her name, Elaineporter, again and again, the ink bleeding through the paper. Each circle tightened around her name like armor, proof that no one could erase her. A soft knock startled her. The bedroom door opened just a crack, and Abby's face peeked in. The girl's expression was pale, wary, but her eyes burned with something fierce. "Grandma? Are you okay?" Elaine hesitated, then beckoned her inside. Abby shut the door quickly behind her, as though afraid her parents might catch her betraying them. She crept to the bed, her gaze dropping to the papers spread across it. "What's all this?" Abby asked. Her voice hushed. Elaine steadied her tone. "This, sweetheart, is proof. They think they can push me out. But the truth is right here." She tapped the deed with her finger, firm and precise. "Better than they think." Abby's lips curved into the faintest smile, relief flickering in her eyes. She sat beside her grandmother, careful not to wrinkle the documents. "So they can't make you leave? Not really?" "Not without a fight," Elaine said. "And if there's one thing your grandmother knows how to do, it's fight smart." The words steadied her, grounding her in a determination she hadn't felt in years. For too long she had stayed quiet, letting Melissa and Kyle dictate the mood of the house. But now the balance shifted. She had the weapon they didn't know existed, the undeniable truth written in black and white. Downstairs, a burst of laughter rang out, Kyle's laugh sharp and grating. Abby flinched, then rolled her eyes. "He's already talking like this is his place, like he gets to decide everything." Elaine's jaw set. She carefully slid the papers back into the envelope, smoothing the flap before tucking it under her arm. "He's about to learn how wrong he is." Abby leaned closer, her voice almost a whisper. "What are you going to do?" Elaine stood, her back straight, her chin lifted. She crossed the room to her desk, where the phone sat in its cradle. I'm going to remind them whose house they're standing in. She picked up the receiver, the weight solid in her hand, and began dialing a number she hadn't used in years but remembered by heart. On the second ring, a clear professional voice answered. Rachel Klein, Real Estate Law. Elaine's lips tightened into something between a smile and a vow. Rachel, it's Elaine Porter. I need your help. They think they own my house. She glanced at Abby, who watched wide-eyed, holding her breath. Elaine's grip on the receiver hardened. But I have the deed, and I'm not leaving. The strip mall office didn't look like much from the outside, a faded sign above the glass door, blinds half drawn against the Missouri sun. But as Elaine stepped inside, the cool blast of air conditioning and the faint scent of coffee and printer ink steadied her nerves. This was neutral ground, a place where Kyle's smirk and Melissa's hesitant apologies couldn't reach her. Here, she had the advantage. Behind a neat desk stacked with legal pads and color-coded folders sat Rachel Klein. Her hair was pulled into a sleek bun, her posture straight, her eyes sharp. She glanced up from her computer as Elaine entered, and her face softened into a polite but professional smile. Mrs. Porter, Rachel asked, standing to shake her hand. Her grip was firm, confident, the kind of handshake that said she was used to closing battles before they began. Elaine nodded. Yes, thank you for seeing me on such short notice. Rachel gestured toward the chair across from her. Have a seat. Tell me what's going on. Elaine lowered herself into the chair, smoothing her skirt with deliberate calm. But the moment Rachel's gaze locked on hers, the words spilled out. The confrontation in the hallway, Kyle's arrogance, Melissa's betrayal, Abby's quiet plea. She spoke not in anger, but with the clarity of someone cataloging every detail for the record. Rachel listened, tapping her pen against her notebook in short, precise beats. When Elaine finished, the lawyer leaned back in her chair, lips pressing into a line. So, let me get this straight. Your daughter and son-in-law are living in your house, paying no rent, no mortgage, no utilities, and now they're trying to tell you to leave? Elaine's voice was steady, but the undercurrent of hurt was undeniable. Yes, they told me to get out of my own home. Rachel set her pen down. The faint hum of the air conditioning filled the pause before she spoke again. Then what we're looking at isn't just family drama. It's a matter of law. That house is in your name alone, correct? Elaine slid the envelope across the desk, the deed peeking out from the top. My name, no one else's. Rachel's eyes flicked across the document, quick and efficient. Then she looked up, her expression sharpening into something like satisfaction. Then it's simple. They don't get to put you out. In fact, you'll be the one serving them. Elaine exhaled, a weight lifting from her chest. You mean eviction? Rachel gave a single firm nod. Exactly. Under Missouri law, they have no standing. You'll give them formal notice, 30 days to vacate. If they fight it, we take it to court. And trust me, you'll win. For the first time in days, Elaine felt her lips curl into something resembling a smile. It wasn't joy exactly, but it was close. The relief of knowing she wasn't defenseless. Perfect, she said softly, savoring the word. Rachel pulled a legal pad toward her, jotting down details with brisk efficiency. The scratch of her pen was a steady rhythm, reassuring in its certainty. We'll need to document everything, dates, conversations, any damage they cause. The more detail, the stronger your case. And if they spread lies, don't worry. We counter lies with proof. Elaine nodded, her hands resting on the deed as if drawing strength from the paper. Proof. That was the word she needed. Rachel slid a set of preliminary forms across the desk. Sign here to authorize me to act on your behalf. I'll draft the eviction notice tonight. Elaine's hand didn't tremble as she signed. Each stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming a piece of her dignity. When she left the office, the sun was dipping low, painting the parking lot in shades of orange and gold. She carried the folder tucked tightly under her arm, as though Kyle might leap from the shadows and try to snatch it away. But back on Chestnut Drive, it wasn't Kyle lurking in the shadows. It was his voice carrying across the neighborhood. Elaine froze halfway up the driveway when she heard it. Kyle stood with a cluster of neighbors near the mailbox, his tone cocky, his laugh loud. "Won't be long now," he boasted, clapping one man on the shoulder. "We're taking over the house soon. Whole place will be ours." The neighbors chuckled politely, uncertain, but Kyle only grew louder, repeating the claim as if daring Elaine to contradict him. Elaine tightened her grip on the folder, the papers inside crackling. He had no idea what was coming. Elaine's hands shook only once, when she first unfolded the crisp sheet of paper Rachel had drafted. After that, her grip steadied. The eviction notice was clean, precise, unshakable, stamped with legal authority. 30 days. That was all the time Melissa and Kyle had left to play house under her roof. She carried the paper through the hallway, her footsteps muffled against the worn carpet runner. Every creak of the floorboards felt like an announcement, a drum roll building toward a moment that would change everything. From behind the closed door of the downstairs bedroom came the faint sound of the TV, Kyle's laugh rising above the canned studio laughter. Elaine stopped outside their door. The air smelled faintly of cologne and stale takeout wafting from their room, odors that didn't belong to her house but had seeped into it anyway. She lifted the tape, pressed the paper flat against the wood, and smoothed it with her palm. The sound of adhesive crackling in the silence made her pulse quicken. The notice stood stark and official, a boundary in black ink. She had just stepped back when the door flew open. Melissa stood there, eyes wide, hair pulled back in a messy knot, panic already climbing into her expression. She looked down at the paper, lips parting in disbelief. "Mom, what are you doing?" Elaine didn't flinch. "I'm giving you notice." 30 days, Melissa's face drained of color. She grabbed the paper as if tearing it down would undo what was written there. But before she could move, Kyle appeared behind her, his presence filling the doorway like a shadow. He snatched the paper from Melissa's hand, eyes darting across the page. "This is a joke," he said, his tone thick with contempt. He crumpled the notice in his fist, his knuckles whitening. "You can't evict us." Elaine met his glare without blinking. Her voice was calm, colder than he expected. "Watch me." The silence that followed was electric. Even the television inside the room seemed to quiet, as though the house itself was listening. Abby, who had lingered near the staircase, covered her mouth to hide a grin. Her eyes sparkled with something close to hope, though she was careful not to let her parents see. Kyle's smirk returned, but this time it was sharper, edged with anger. He tossed the crumpled notice onto the floor, the paper skittering across the hallway. "You really think a piece of paper scares me? You think you can win against us?" His voice rose, loud enough for the neighbors to hear through the open windows. "Fine. If you want to fight, you'll get one. I'll see you in court." Melissa looked between them, torn, her hand half lifted toward her mother, but dropping before she could speak. She retreated into the bedroom instead, her shoulders slumping, leaving Kyle to spit out his threats unchecked. Elaine bent down, retrieved the notice, and smoothed the creases as if nothing had happened. She held it up, her eyes locked on Kyle. "This copy is mine. The court will get theirs. You can tear it 100 times, and it won't matter." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty cracked his expression. He turned away abruptly, slamming the door so hard that a picture frame rattled on the hallway wall. Elaine pressed the paper to her chest, the faint scent of toner and paper mixing with the cedar from her bedroom chest, where she'd first pulled out the deed. The noise of Kyle's muttering carried through the thin wood of the door, curses muffled but venomous. Abby tiptoed closer, her voice just above a whisper. "Grandma, does this mean they really have to leave?" Elaine smoothed Abby's hair, her hand gentle despite the adrenaline still surging through her veins. "It means the clock just started ticking," she said. "And this time, it's not my time running out. It's theirs." From the other side of the door came Kyle's final words, growled low but clear enough to pierce through. "Court, Elaine. You'll regret this when I win." Elaine straightened, her chin high, the notice still clutched in her hand. She had no intention of losing. The courthouse smelled faintly of disinfectant and old wood polish, a mix that made Elaine's stomach churn as she followed Rachel down the corridor. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, casting a sterile glow over the worn tile floors. Each step echoed like a countdown. Inside the courtroom, the air was thicker, filled with whispers, the scrape of chairs, and the sharp shuffle of papers. Melissa and Kyle were already there, seated at the defendant's table. Melissa's hands were clasped tight in her lap, her knuckles pale. Kyle leaned back in his chair with calculated ease, wearing that smug grin Elaine had come to expect. He caught her eye across the aisle and mouthed the words, "You're finished." Elaine's pulse quickened, but Rachel's presence beside her steadied her nerves. The attorney adjusted her blazer, calm and composed, and whispered, "Let him perform. The more he talks, the easier he makes it for us." When the judge entered, the room rose to its feet, silence replacing the whispers. His gavel struck once, sharp and commanding, before he gestured for everyone to sit. Kyle wasted no time. The moment the judge asked for his statement, he leaned forward, his voice booming with theatrical outrage. "Your Honor, this house was promised to us. Elaine told my wife, her own daughter, that someday it would belong to us. We've lived there, taken care of it, made it ours. She's only trying to throw us out because I finally told her the truth. She doesn't belong there anymore." Melissa gave a small nod, though her eyes darted nervously toward the judge. The words cut, but Elaine held her composure. Promises, spoken casually, long ago perhaps, in the kind of way parents sometimes talk about the future. But promises weren't deeds. They weren't contracts. Rachel rose gracefully, her voice even but laced with steel. "Your Honor, opposing counsel has offered nothing but hearsay. What matters is ownership. My client has lived in and maintained that home for decades. The deed is solely in her name. The mortgage was paid off entirely by her. And here," she placed a folder on the judge's bench, sliding out documents with practiced precision, "are the original deed, the mortgage payoff, and years of tax receipts, all in the name of Elaine Porter." The shuffle of papers seemed to echo louder than Kyle's earlier bluster. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents. The courtroom leaned in, breath held, waiting. Melissa whispered something frantically to Kyle, her face paling further as she caught sight of Elaine's name repeated across page after page. Kyle stiffened, the color draining from his face, but he forced a laugh, sharp and brittle. "Anyone can print papers." "That doesn't mean—" The judge's gavel struck again, cutting him off. His voice was clipped. "No nonsense. The evidence is clear. This property belongs solely to Mrs. Porter." The sound of those words rippled through Elaine's chest like a release valve. Melissa gasped audibly, one hand flying to her mouth. Kyle's jaw worked silently, as if searching for words that would not come. Elaine rose slowly, her chair scraping back against the floor. She looked directly at Kyle, then Melissa. Her voice was steady, unshaken. "You were right about one thing. I did make promises, but consider this my promise revoked." The judge cleared his throat, drawing everyone's eyes back. "As for residents, the defendants will be granted 30 days to vacate the property. Failure to comply will result in forcible removal." By Sheriff Kyle slammed his palm against the table, the crack startling the gallery. "This isn't over!" His voice broke through the courtroom silence, wild and desperate now. But for Elaine, it was over. Not the process, not the battles still to come, but the power Kyle thought he held had shattered in an instant. She folded her hands neatly in front of her, exhaling the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The gavel struck one last time, final and ringing. 30 days. The countdown had shifted, and now it was their clock running out. Rumors don't need wings to fly. They crawl through fences, slip across lawns, and wedge themselves into backyards where truth has no chance to catch up. Elaine discovered this one afternoon when Abby burst into her room, cheeks flushed, voice tight with urgency. "Grandma," Abby whispered, shutting the door behind her. "You need to hear this. Kyle's outside talking to Mr. Henderson and the neighbors. He's saying you're losing it." Elaine's stomach turned cold. She had known Kyle would retaliate, but she hadn't expected him to drag her reputation into the mud of their cul-de-sac. She followed Abby to the upstairs window, where she could just make out Kyle in the driveway, arms gesturing wide as two neighbors nodded uncomfortably. "She doesn't know what she's doing anymore," Kyle said, his voice carrying easily in the still afternoon air. "She's confused, unstable. I mean, who tries to throw their own daughter out on the street? It's sad." Really, Melissa stood beside him, her arms folded, nodding dutifully like a choir backing its soloist. "It's true," she added softly, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Mom, she's not herself. We're just trying to help her." The words landed like glass shattering in Elaine's chest. Her daughter's voice, the same voice that once asked for bedtime stories and whispered secrets into her ear, now painted her as a woman unraveling. Abby glanced at Elaine, her eyes fiery. "They're lying. Everyone knows you're fine, but they're making people doubt you." Elaine placed a hand on her granddaughter's shoulder, steadying her own rising anger. "Then we'll remind them of the truth." 2 mornings later, Elaine sent handwritten invitations to the neighbors. Nothing elaborate, just a note in neat script. "Coffee at my place. Saturday, 10 a.m. I'd like to clear a few things up." She baked lemon bars that evening, the scent of citrus filling the kitchen like armor against the bitterness of gossip. When Saturday came, the neighbors trickled in, curious and cautious. Mrs. Henderson carried a plate of muffins, her eyes darting between Elaine and the hallway where Kyle had retreated with a scowl. The living room buzzed with polite chatter, the aroma of fresh coffee softening the edges of tension. Elaine waited until the cups were poured and the room settled before she spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, but it carried an edge of steel. "I've heard some rumors about me lately. That I don't know what I'm doing. That I've lost my grip." She paused, letting the words hang. "So I'd like to share something with you all directly." She reached into the cedar envelope she had brought downstairs and laid the deed flat on the coffee table. The official seal gleamed under the light. She added tax receipts, mortgage payoff statements, each paper stacked neatly. "This house has been mine since the day I bought it. My name, my payments, my taxes. Not one of those things belongs to anyone else." The neighbors leaned closer. Mrs. Henderson adjusted her glasses, scanning the page, then looked up at Elaine with a small nod. "That looks clear enough to me." Another neighbor, Mr. Franklin, cleared his throat. "Kyle told us you promised the house to them." Elaine's eyes flickered briefly toward the hallway, then back to the group. "I may have spoken about the future once, but promises can be broken when they're abused." And her voice softened, but it didn't waver. "I'm not losing anything, except patience for people who mistake generosity for weakness." Silence filled the room for a beat, heavy but not hostile. Then Mrs. Henderson spoke, her voice firm. "You've always been solid, Elaine. We know who you are. We believe you." The murmur of agreement that followed was like a bomb. The neighbors rallied, not with loud declarations, but with steady nods and quiet support, the kind that mattered most in a close-knit street. From the hallway came a sudden crash. Elaine flinched as a hollow thud reverberated through the house. The neighbors startled, coffee sloshing in cups. Abby bolted upright, rushing toward the noise. Kyle stood in the hallway, his fist still pressed against the jagged hole he had smashed into the drywall. Dust flaked down onto the carpet. His chest heaved, eyes blazing with rage, his voice low but venomous. "You think you've won them over? You haven't seen anything yet." The hole in the drywall was only the beginning. By the next morning, Elaine noticed scratches gouged along the hallway baseboards, like someone had dragged furniture hard against the walls on purpose. In the kitchen, the cabinet under the sink sagged on one hinge, splinters sticking out where it had been kicked. The faint smell of sour milk drifted from the fridge door they had left ajar overnight, as if even the air had been spoiled by their anger. Elaine stood in the living room, camera in hand, her fingers steady as she clicked photo after photo. The flash lit up every wound in the house, the jagged edges of broken wood, the cracked plaster, the scuffed paint. She documented it all with the precision of someone who refused to let a single detail be erased. Abby lingered nearby, her phone held low at her side. She pretended to scroll, but Elaine caught the quick shutter sound. "You're taking pictures too?" Elaine asked softly. Abby gave a small nod, her eyes darting toward her parents' closed bedroom door. "Just in case. I don't trust them not to break your camera, or say you made it all up." Elaine's chest warmed at the quiet defiance in her granddaughter's voice. "Smart girl," she said. Later that afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table with the spread of photographs in front of her. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, though it barely masked the underlying sourness of neglect and damage. She dialed Rachel, who answered on the second ring. Elaine described what she had found, her words crisp, almost clinical. Rachel interrupted only once, her tone edged with satisfaction. "Perfect. This is exactly what we need for restitution. The court doesn't just care about ownership, it cares about damages. The more they destroy, the deeper the hole they dig for themselves." Elaine exhaled slowly. "Then let's use every crack they leave behind." By the end of the call, Rachel had already filed a motion to add restitution to the eviction proceedings. Elaine also placed a call to her insurance company, carefully explaining each item of damage while flipping through the photographs. The adjuster's tone was sympathetic but practical. An inspector would need to come out. The next day, Melissa caught her mother in the hallway, her eyes rimmed red, cheeks streaked with tears. "Mom, please," she whispered, glancing toward the room where Kyle sulked, pretending not to listen. "Don't do this. We can fix the walls, we can patch things up, just don't make it official." Elaine's heart tightened, but her resolve held. She looked at her daughter, truly looked, at the way Melissa wrung her hands like a child caught between two impossible loyalties. "You had the chance to patch things up before the walls," Elaine said evenly. "This is no longer just about family. It's about respect, and I won't be disrespected in my own home." Melissa's lips trembled as though she might argue, but instead she turned away, her shoulders caving under invisible weight. That night, Elaine printed duplicates of every photo and sealed them in an envelope. She placed the originals back in the cedar chest and handed the copies to Rachel the next morning at her office. Rachel flipped through them, her expression tightening with each image. "This," Rachel said finally, tapping the photo of the broken cabinet, "is not just evidence. It's leverage. They've handed us the rope. We just have to let the court see who tied the knots." The courtroom 2 weeks later hummed with anticipation, the air thick with murmurs and the faint tang of old varnish. Elaine sat straight-backed beside Rachel, the envelope of photographs resting between them. Kyle lounged with forced confidence at the opposing table, Melissa staring down at her lap. The judge adjusted his glasses, his gaze sweeping across the room. "We'll now schedule a hearing on the matter of restitution, alongside the existing eviction case." His gavel cracked down like thunder, final and sharp. Elaine's heart kicked, not with fear this time, but with readiness. They had tried to tear her house apart, but all they had really done was build her case stronger. The second time Elaine stepped into the courtroom, she did not feel small. The fear that had knotted her stomach before was gone, replaced, with a calm that spread through her like steel. She carried her folder under one arm and her chin held high, her sensible heels clicking on the polished floor. Behind her, Abby followed with Rachel, slipping into the gallery. Elaine caught her granddaughter's proud little smile and let it settle her nerves further. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. the faint scent of floor polish, mixed with the musty paper smell of old files stacked against the clerk's desk. Elaine noticed Kyle sitting at the defense table, arms sprawled wide across the back of his chair as if he owned the room. Melissa sat beside him, hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were bone white. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The gavel cracked once, echoing through the chamber. Kyle wasted no time. He leaned forward, eyes sharp, his tone oily but loud enough for the gallery to hear. "Your Honor, I didn't bring my wife's mother into that house. She invited herself. Melissa let her move in, and I had no say. I've been stuck with her ever since Melissa flinched." The judge's eyes narrowed, but he gestured for her to speak when she leaned toward the microphone. Her voice was thin, shaky. "That's not true. It was his idea. He said we'd save money if we moved in with Mom. He said she owed it to us." The courtroom went still, the words hanging in the air like smoke. Elaine sat perfectly still, watching the cracks in their facade spread. Rachel rose slowly, adjusting her blazer with deliberate calm. She turned toward the judge, her voice clear and steady. "What you've just witnessed, Your Honor, is important. These two are united in greed, but divided in blame. They cannot agree on a single truth because they've been twisting it from the start. My client took them in out of generosity, not obligation. And in return, they've caused damage, spread lies, and now attempt to turn on each other." Melissa's eyes dropped to the table. Kyle glared at her, his lips curling in silent fury. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Restitution will be addressed. I want the full evidence presented at the next hearing. Photos, estimates, insurance reports. For now, the matter of eviction remains primary." His gavel tapped, quieter this time, but no less final. Elaine allowed herself a small exhale, her gaze sliding to Abby in the gallery. Her granddaughter gave her a discreet thumbs up, eyes shining. That silent support, untainted by manipulation or selfishness, gave Elaine more strength than any document ever could. But the moment was short-lived. The bailiff stepped forward, a folded envelope in hand. He moved toward the defense table first, setting the document firmly in front of Kyle. The sound of the paper hitting wood was louder than it should have been. Kyle unfolded it, his face blanching as he scanned the text. He slammed it down on the table, the veins in his temple pulsing. "This is bull." The judge cut him off sharply. "That, Mr. Porter, is a final eviction order. The sheriff will enforce it if you and your wife are not gone within 72 hours. Melissa gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Kyle cursed under his breath, fists clenched so tightly the tendons in his hands strained. Elaine sat straighter, the calm of vindication coursing through her. The bailiff stepped back, his voice carrying through the courtroom. "Order served." The weight of those two words filled the room. Elaine didn't need to look at Rachel to know they had won the battle, but she could feel, with every ounce of instinct she had, that Kyle was far from finished. Elaine thought she had felt finality in the courtroom when the gavel came down. But it wasn't until the sheriff's cruiser rolled slowly onto Chestnut Drive, 2 mornings later, that the weight of victory truly settled in. The sound of gravel crunching under the tires drew every curtain on the street wide open. The sheriff climbed out, his boots striking the pavement with steady authority. He carried the folded notice like a weapon of paper and ink. A deputy trailed him, already scanning the property with a neutral expression, as though he had seen this scene play out dozens of times before. Elaine stood on the porch, back straight, the morning air cool against her skin. The faint scent of cut grass drifted from a neighbor's yard, but the air felt charged, humming with expectation. "Mrs. Porter," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "Here to enforce the order." She nodded once. No theatrics, no words wasted. He strode to the door and taped the paper dead center, pressing it flat with a gloved hand. The bold lettering screamed across the street. 72 hours to vacate. The house erupted behind her. Melissa stumbled forward, still in her robe, tears streaking her face. This isn't right, she sobbed, clutching at the door frame as if it might disappear without her. This is our home too. You can't just put us out like animals. The sheriff didn't answer. He didn't need to. The paper on the door spoke louder than Melissa ever could. Then Kyle appeared. His face was flushed, his hair uncombed, his fists balled at his sides. He stormed onto the porch, brushing past Melissa, his voice carrying across the yard. "This is a damn joke," he shouted. "You think you've beaten me? You think a piece of paper makes you queen of this house?" Elaine didn't move, didn't blink. She met his fury with the cool calm that had carried her this far. "You wanted me out," she said, her words sharp but quiet enough that he had to lean closer to hear. "Looks like you're the one leaving instead." The neighbors were already gathering. Lawn chairs scraped, coffee cups were clutched in hands, whispers traveled like sparks through dry grass. The Hendersons stood on their porch, the Franklins closer to the curb. Some exchanged looks of satisfaction, others just shook their heads in disbelief. Melissa buried her face in her hands, her sobs echoing down the block. Kyle stood rigid, his chest heaving, the muscles in his jaw twitching. The sight of the neighbors watching only fed his rage. Abby slipped up beside Elaine, sliding her small hand into her grandmother's. She tilted her chin toward the crowd, then back to Elaine. "They deserve this," she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm around them. Elaine gave her hand a soft squeeze, her gaze never leaving Kyle. "It's not punishment," she murmured back. "It's justice." But Kyle wasn't listening. His eyes darted to the notice taped to the door, then to the neighbors, then back to Elaine. A slow, dangerous smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You think this house will be yours when we're gone?" he said, his voice dropping low, meant only for her and Abby. "We've got 3 days, Elaine. And I'll make damn sure you regret every hour of it. By the time we leave, this place won't feel like home anymore." Elaine's stomach tightened. It wasn't a bluff, not this time. The silence after they left was the wrong kind of quiet. Elaine had expected relief, maybe even peace, but what lingered was heavier, the kind of silence that hid something rotten beneath it. The air smelled faintly of dust and stale takeout, a sour film clinging to every room. She stepped cautiously through the house, Abby trailing just behind her, both of them holding their breath as if they were entering a crime scene. In many ways, they were. The first wound revealed itself in the hallway. The closet door had been kicked so hard that the frame splintered outward, jagged wood sticking like broken teeth. Abby snapped a picture quickly, the flash bouncing off the shards. Elaine moved on. In the living room, the carpet had been slashed with something sharp. A knife, maybe scissors, leaving ugly lines carved deep into the fibers. She crouched, brushing her hand over the threads, the rough edges prickling her palm. Abby leaned over her shoulder and whispered, "They wanted to scar it so you'd see it every day." The kitchen was worse. A cabinet door hung off one hinge, the screws stripped, wood cracked at the seams. On the counter, a drawer had been yanked so violently it no longer fit back in place. The refrigerator door was dented, as if someone had rammed it with a shoulder. Elaine inhaled sharply, the faint odor of spoiled food wafted out when she opened it. "Every crack, every scrape," Elaine murmured, holding her phone steady to take photo after photo, "is more evidence." Upstairs, they found a door smashed in. Abby's old room, the lock splintered and the knob twisted off completely. Elaine's throat tightened at the sight. It wasn't just destruction, it was spite. Kyle had wanted her to know he could break anything, even the spaces meant for the next generation. Abby, camera in hand, snapped photo after photo, her face set in grim concentration. "We'll show them," she said softly, almost to herself. "They can't just get away with this." By the time they finished, Elaine had a catalog of wreckage that stretched from one end of the house to the other. Scratches along baseboards, a shattered towel rack in the upstairs bathroom, even the faint smell of cigarette smoke clinging to the curtains, something no one in the family ever used before Kyle. That afternoon, Rachel met Elaine at the house. She moved from room to room with practiced efficiency, her heels clicking against the damaged floors. Each time she examined a broken hinge or cracked wall, her lips tightened into a line. "This," Rachel said, flipping through the photos on Elaine's phone, "is perfect for restitution. Judges don't like seeing generosity repaid with destruction. This will tip things further in our favor." Elaine's jaw set. "They wanted to leave scars. I'll make sure those scars cost them." The next day, the insurance adjuster arrived. He carried a clipboard, his pen scratching steadily as he inspected the damage. His face gave little away, but when he crouched near the torn carpet and muttered, "No way this happened by accident," Elaine caught the faintest spark of vindication. After 2 hours, the adjuster snapped his folder shut. "This isn't normal wear and tear. This was deliberate. I'll be filing the report as vandalism." Elaine nodded once, calm and contained, though her heart hammered in her chest. She refused to give Kyle and Melissa the satisfaction of seeing her unravel. Instead, she turned to Abby and said firmly, "Every crack is more evidence." Rachel filed the claim for damages alongside the eviction paperwork, her voice crisp over the phone that evening. "The judge will not ignore this, Elaine. They thought they could hurt you, but all they've done is hand you another weapon." Elaine sat at the kitchen table, the scent of lemon polish clinging faintly to the air after she'd scrubbed down the counter. She spread the photographs across the wood grain, each image a scar catalogued, every mark a debt waiting to be paid. The phone buzzed again. Rachel's voice came steady and direct. "The court date for damages is set." Elaine's lips pressed into a thin line. They had tried to make her house unlivable. Instead, they had built her case stronger than ever. Courtrooms had their own kind of silence, not empty, not calm, but heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Elaine felt that weight as she set the thick folder of photographs on the table in front of her. Each picture was a scar her house carried, and now those scars were about to speak for her. Across the aisle, Kyle slouched in his chair, arms crossed, his jaw tight with defiance. Melissa sat stiffly beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a crumpled tissue. The contrast between them was stark, his anger a live wire, her guilt a sinking anchor. The judge called the case, and Rachel rose first. Her heels clicked against the tile, her tone measured and precise. "Your Honor, we are here today not only because my client had to evict her daughter and son-in-law, but because those tenants, in retaliation, deliberately damaged the property. We have extensive photographic evidence, insurance documentation, and corroborating witness testimony." Elaine slid the envelope across, her fingers brushing the rough paper edges. Rachel opened it with calm efficiency, spreading the photographs one by one across the judge's bench. The torn carpet, the broken cabinet, the splintered door frame. Each image landed with the finality of a gavel strike. Abby, sitting in the gallery, stood when Rachel motioned to her. She approached with quiet determination, her phone in hand. "These are mine," she said softly, offering it to the clerk. "I took them too, just in case." The judge nodded, flipping through the duplicate set of photos. His brow furrowed deeper with each image. Finally, he turned to the insurance report. "This adjuster's notes are clear. This was vandalism, not wear and tear." Kyle shot to his feet, his voice rising in protest. "That's a lie. She made us live in that dump, and now she's trying to blame us for things that were already broken." Melissa tugged at his sleeve, hissing under her breath, "Stop. You're making it worse." Her voice cracked on the words, her tissue trembling in her hand. Rachel stepped forward smoothly. "Your Honor, my client lived in that home for decades without such damage. It only appeared after these two were told to leave. The timeline is undeniable. Their excuses cannot outweigh hard proof." The judge lifted a hand, silencing the room. His tone was clipped, stern. "I have seen enough. The evidence is overwhelming. Damages were deliberate. Therefore, I am ordering the defendants, Kyle and Melissa Porter, to pay full restitution for the property damage, as well as court costs. The sentence dropped like a stone. Melissa let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. Kyle's face turned crimson. He slammed his fist down on the table so hard the sound cracked through the chamber. The bailiff stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "Sir," he warned firmly. Kyle's chest heaved, but he sank back into his chair, seething, his knuckles white against the wood. Elaine finally spoke, her voice calm but cutting through the tension. "This is the cost of cruelty. You thought you could break me by breaking my house. Instead, you've only broken yourselves." The judge banged his gavel once more. Case closed. As the courtroom emptied, Elaine caught sight of the moving truck pulling onto Chestnut Drive through the tall windows. Neighbors were already gathering on their porches, some folding their arms, others whispering behind their hands. The eviction had moved from paperwork to reality, and it would not be quiet. The bailiff opened the doors wide, his voice carrying, "Next case." But the sound outside was louder now, the grind of gears as the moving truck backed into her driveway, the screech of brakes cutting through the crisp afternoon air. Kyle and Melissa were about to face not just the law, but the entire neighborhood's eyes. Boxes already littered the curb by the time Elaine stepped onto the porch. Some sat lopsided, taped in haste, while others sagged, corners splitting open to reveal clothes and kitchen utensils spilling onto the grass. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, the cardboard edges curling in the heat. Neighbors watched from shaded porches and driveways, their silence louder than any gossip. Elaine stood tall, the iron railing firm beneath her hand. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The weight of the neighborhood's eyes did the work for her. Melissa bent to set another box down, her hands shaking. Her hair clung to her damp cheeks, and her sobs carried across the lawn, raw and unrestrained. She turned toward her mother, voice breaking. "Mom, please, not like this. Don't let them see us like this." Elaine's face was composed, her voice calm but unyielding. "You told me to get out. You left me on the curb in words. Now it's your turn." Melissa froze, her tears dripping onto the box at her feet. For a flicker of a moment, she looked like a child again, small, lost, and undone by consequences she had helped create. Behind her, Kyle stomped down the truck's ramp, carrying nothing but his fury. He hurled a box onto the pile, the sound cracking against the pavement. His muttered curses were low, but sharp enough for Elaine to catch pieces. "Witch! Old hag! This isn't over!" Abby slipped close to her grandmother, tucking herself into the crook of Elaine's arm. She held her tight, whispering with a calm certainty far beyond her years. "They deserve this." Elaine rested her hand on Abby's shoulder, her eyes never leaving the curb. "It's not punishment," she said quietly. "It's justice." Across the street, Mrs. Henderson shook her head, whispering something to her husband. The Franklins leaned against their fence, arms crossed, expressions grim. No one offered Kyle or Melissa comfort. Every gaze on the block pressed down like judgment handed by a jury of neighbors. Melissa tried one last time. She staggered toward the steps, her voice a plea. "Mom, we're family." "You don't do this to family." Elaine's reply was soft, but it landed like stone. "Family doesn't throw me out of my own house. Family doesn't destroy what I built." Kyle slammed the truck's ramp shut, the metallic clang rattling the boxes. He climbed into the driver's seat without looking at Elaine, his curses muffled by the rumble of the engine. Melissa hesitated, her sobs twisting in the still air, before finally pulling herself into the cab beside him. The truck jerked forward, leaving behind the pile of boxes like discarded shells. The neighbor's stares followed its slow roll down the street, a caravan of shame no one would soon forget. Elaine turned back toward her door, her steps deliberate. At the threshold, she paused, looking once more at the empty curb, at the remnants of arrogance and betrayal stacked in the open sun. Then she closed the door with a heavy final thud. the sound echoing through the house like a verdict. The house smelled different once they were gone. No stale food, no acrid cigarette smoke, no lingering tension pressed into the walls, just air, clean, light, and alive again. Elaine climbed the stairs slowly, her hand trailing along the banisters she had polished herself for decades. Each step felt like reclaiming ground that had been occupied for far too long. Her bedroom door creaked as she opened it. For months, it had felt less like a refuge and more like a bunker, a place to hide from the chaos beyond. Now, with the hallway silent, it felt hers again. She crossed to the dresser, the envelope tucked under her arm. The deed slid out, edges worn but ink still sharp. Elaine smoothed it flat on the desk and lifted the frame she'd bought that morning. The glass gleamed as she placed the document inside, locking it behind a border of oak. She hung it on the wall above her bed, the nails biting into plaster with a satisfying crack. When she stepped back, her name, Elaine Porter, glowed under the lamplight. Abby appeared in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. She studied the framed deed for a long moment, her voice quiet but certain. "Grandma, you took your power back." Elaine turned, her lips curving into a soft smile that carried both pride and grief. "I didn't want to, Abby, but they gave me no choice." Abby walked in, perching on the edge of the bed. She looked younger in that moment, yet older too. Her loyalty had forced her to grow faster than she should have. "It feels different now," she whispered, "like the house can breathe again." Elaine brushed her granddaughter's hair back gently. "It's because the poison's gone." The next day, Rachel stopped by, her briefcase clicking shut with finality as she laid a stack of papers on the table. The lemony scent of fresh paint lingered in the air, mixing with the faint aroma of coffee brewing in the kitchen. "Everything's finalized," Rachel said, sliding the documents toward Elaine. "Kyle and Melissa are barred from filing future claims on this property. No appeals, no loopholes. It's airtight." Elaine traced her finger across the bold lettering, the weight of permanence grounding her. She met Rachel's eyes, her voice steady. "My home. My rules." Forever, Rachel gave a small smile, tapping the folder. "You've won, Elaine." More thoroughly than most people ever get to. But Elaine didn't feel triumphant. She felt resolved. Victories came at a cost, and she was still tallying the scars. That night, she sat in the quiet of her bedroom, the framed deed catching the moonlight from the window. Abby was asleep down the hall, the soft hum of a fan masking the cicadas outside. Elaine leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion finally tugging at her bones. Then the phone rang. The old landline's shrill tone cut through the stillness like a blade. Elaine reached for it, hesitated, then pressed it to her ear. Melissa's voice, jagged with bitterness, filled the line. "I hope you're happy, Mom. You got your precious house. But don't think this makes you a winner. You've lost me. You've lost your daughter forever," static crackled in the pause that followed. Then the sharp click of disconnection. Elaine sat there, the receiver heavy in her hand. The silence afterward even louder than Melissa's words. The house was hers, undeniably, permanently hers. But even victories carved from justice had shadows that lingered. The house groaned with silence, but not the bitter kind Kyle had left behind. This quiet felt expectant, like walls holding their breath, waiting for healing. Elaine stood in the hallway, paintbrush in hand, staring at the jagged hole in the dry wall where Kyle's fist had once landed. The raw edges of plaster seemed less like scars now and more like an invitation, a challenge to reclaim what was hers. She dipped the brush into fresh ivory paint, the bristles soaking with promise. With the first stroke, the harshness of the wound softened beneath her hand. The scent of latex filled the air, sharp but cleansing, replacing the stale odors that had clung for weeks. Abby joined her, hair tied back, an old t-shirt spattered with paint. She giggled when a drip splashed onto her nose. "It feels alive again," she said, grinning as she rolled a wide swath of color across the wall. Elaine glanced at her granddaughter, the corners of her mouth lifting. That's because the poison's gone. They worked room by room. The carpet in the living room, once shredded with angry slashes, was rolled up and hauled to the curb. The new carpet arrived in neat, pristine layers, soft under their feet. Elaine sank into it with a sigh when they finished, curling her toes against the fibers. Abby laughed and collapsed beside her, the two of them staring at the ceiling fans spinning lazily above. In the kitchen, Elaine replaced the broken cabinet door herself. The wood gave off a faint cedar smell when she sanded it, mixing with the tang of lemon oil she'd rubbed into the counters. Every fix was a declaration. This house is mine. Every nail, every hinge, every wall. By the time they reached the upstairs hallway, the air was rich with the blended scents of fresh paint and polish. Elaine paused, leaning against the banister, breathing it all in. It smelled like order, like balance restored. Neighbors began dropping by as word spread. Mrs. Henderson arrived first, carrying a casserole dish wrapped in foil, her smile warm. "Thought you could use this," she said softly. "We're all proud of you, Elaine." Soon others followed, plates of cookies, fresh rolls, even a jug of sweet tea. They didn't linger long, but each gesture left a mark of solidarity. The same eyes that once watched in silence during the eviction now shone with quiet respect. Abby helped carry the dishes into the kitchen, her laughter bright as she arranged them on the counter. "It's like the house is celebrating with us," she said, running her hand across the freshly polished wood. Elaine chuckled, though her throat tightened with emotion. "It's not the house celebrating," she said. "It's us." We're finally free inside it, that night. After the neighbors left and the house settled into its new rhythm, Elaine sat at the kitchen table. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was steady, no longer a backdrop for tension, but a reminder of normalcy. Abby sprawled across the couch in the living room, a book open on her lap, her soft humming drifting into the kitchen. The mail lay stacked at the end of the table, unopened. Elaine sifted through it slowly. Bills, advertisements, a magazine subscription she didn't remember renewing. Then one envelope caught her eye. It was crisp, white, with the university's crest stamped in blue across the corner. She slid it open with careful fingers, her heart quickening as she read. "Dear Mrs. Porter," the letter began. "We are pleased to inform you that your contribution to the Chestnut Drive Community Fund has been honored with a scholarship in your name. One deserving student will receive tuition assistance this fall, thanks to your generosity." Elaine's hand trembled slightly as she set the letter down. A scholarship. Her name attached to something that would outlast even this house. She turned toward Abby, who looked up from the couch. "What is it, Grandma?" Elaine's lips curved into a smile, her voice hushed with awe. "It's a thank you letter. My name is being honored for the first time in years." The house didn't feel heavy with battles. It felt like a beginning. The porch swing creaked softly, its chains sighing with each gentle sway. Elaine sat back against the cushions, the evening breeze carrying the faint scent of fresh-cut grass and barbecue smoke drifting from a neighbor's yard. The sun was sinking low, washing Chestnut Drive in amber light, turning the cracked sidewalks and maple trees into something warm, almost golden. For the first time in months, maybe years, Elaine felt her heartbeat match the rhythm of peace. Beside her, Abby curled up with her knees pulled close, hair tumbling over her shoulder. She tilted her face toward the sky, squinting into the fading orange glow. The quiet between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was companionable, stitched with trust. Elaine let her gaze roam the street. The curb where Kyle and Melissa's boxes had once sat was empty now, only the faint impression in the grass remaining. A mockingbird perched on the utility wire overhead, its song sweet and sharp, cutting through the hum of cicadas. Her eyes drifted to the window behind her, where the framed deed hung on the wall just inside. She had set it in view deliberately, a symbol that faced both the street and her heart. Her name, bold, unshakable, was a shield, a reminder A victory. This house finally feels like mine again, Elaine said, her voice low but certain. Abby leaned into her side, her words quiet but fierce. It always was. Elaine's throat tightened at the simplicity of it. She turned, brushing a strand of hair from Abby's forehead, her hand lingering there. You've seen too much of what people can take from each other, she murmured. But I want you to remember this. You can always take it back. The swing rocked slowly, the evening air growing cooler, the scent of lemon polish still faintly clinging to Elaine's hands from the day's last bit of cleaning. She glanced again at the deed inside the window, then at Abby's small, steady frame pressed against her. She smiled, not triumphant, not bitter, but steady, unshaken, carved from something deeper than either of them could name. Her palm rested on the glass of the framed paper as if claiming it again, as if grounding herself in the weight of her own name. The street had quieted now. Curtains had closed, neighbors retreating into their homes. The world no longer looked at Elaine as a woman under siege, but as someone who had stood her ground and won. She exhaled slowly, the porch swing creaking, the words forming on her lips with final clarity. My daughter said, "Get out. My husband doesn't want you here." So I took back the house and left them both on the curb.